Where is my home? The idea of home for me has become a quite complicated idea. For me, home has transformed into a feeling, a person, rather than a physical place. For me, home doesn't really feel like grounded or rooted in a specific location. I can feel at home when I talk to someone, when I reconnect with people, when I FaceTime with family members who I can't normally see on a day-to-day basis because of immigration laws that prevent us from seeing each other in physical realms. So my relationship of home has been digitized. Technology has allowed me to create a home that transcends physicality. I think that being someone who has constantly moved every year, houses, apartments, locations, it's hard to place for me a home that's grounded and rooted, because I do believe that I am globally a citizen of the world, and the world is my home, and technology and digital access allows me to think and view the world as my home. Quite often, because I have to move a lot from place to place, sometimes I think of symbols as relics of my home. So for instance, my dad's suitcase is a symbol of home, my birthland, the Philippines. My dog is a symbol of my home in Los Angeles, the home that we created together, where I became complete when she entered my life. And now she's with me all the time, traveling, and she is a piece of my home of Los Angeles that I lived for more than 18 years. My sweater from Berkeley serves as a symbol of warmth that I received in college, and I also consider the Bay Area my home. And whenever I proudly wear that sweater, I'm reminded of the memories of growth and accomplishment and community building I was able to shape in that physical location. And I feel a sense of comfort whenever I wear that sweater, that place and time is not too far from me, and I carry it all the time. New York is my newfound home, and I feel like because it's a place that is fairly new, it's hard to say what I carry with me that symbolizes this newfound home for me. But it's as simple as my keys to my apartment. That is a relic that I can say I'm building towards a newfound opportunity of what home life is for me in this new chapter. Ethnic roots for me is a complicated idea. I was born in Manila, Philippines, but my background is that I'm Spanish, German, and Filipino. But I grew up in the United States, and I present as Asian passing. Sometimes, actually, Latinos think I'm half them. A lot of Asians think, I'm half Caucasian, which is not far from the truth. But ethnic roots for me is a very complicated idea because of migration and colonization. The Philippines already historically is a colonized country. It's an over-colonized country. So ethnically, I'm not sure what I relate to more. In some ways, I grew up in a Spanish household in the Philippines, and I could be the worst Filipino that you ever met just because all of the things that I did in my household back in the Philippines was very much in a Spanish way of thinking, a colonized way of thinking. And I didn't even know how to speak Tagalog until I was in school when I was 7 years old. My household rang in the language of Spanish. It was, quote unquote, the superior language to speak in. That's what my grandfather wanted us to think. So ethnically, I don't know what I am. In America, I'm Asian, not mixed, but I'm Asian. And I can never be too American enough. But in the Philippines, I'm American because, English was my first language. But this idea of ethnic culture, I think for me, it's important to recognize the complexities of ethnicity, identity, and presentation. I think for me, a multicultural ethnic identity is necessary in order for me to understand my cultural background. In a lot of ways, I don't even know what it means to be Filipino. And I find myself searching for that identity, searching for songs, searching for the indigenous language that my grandmother spoke, searching for relatability, trying to find myself in Filipino textbooks. But again, it seems as though I'm not Filipino enough. Similarly, when I look at my family history, I see a lineage of European ancestry, and somehow when I try to relate to my Spanish, German roots, I'm not European enough. So never being enough for my own ethnic background has been a constant struggle, and I think maybe mixed children will understand this in many ways. And I do make it, and I need to have the intentionality to seek deeper meaning, to be able to really understand the impacts of colonization onto me. My immigration story to the United States was a forced and violent one. I'm a refugee asylum from the Philippines, and we migrated in November 1st, 1999. We migrated to the United States for safety, for direct safety, because my family and I were being persecuted in the Philippines in very grotesque and in an injustice way. America was, never in the cards for us. And I think in many ways it gave us the gift and the opportunity to be normal, to be able to gain a life that provided safety. Because of the violent events that forced my migration to the United States with my family members, I don't want to talk about, the trauma associated with it. But I think I want to share the beauty and the perspective that I've gained from it, which is the power of choice and the power of reinvention and the power of creating an environment that serves to protect and nurture your family. And I think that's what I gained from moving to America. My immigrant artist experience shaped my identity and creative work in many ways. When I came to the United States, I didn't have that much opportunity to financially grow. My parents, sacrificed all their money and status to start a new life at the age of 58. And in their 50s, they truly had very little. And it's a hard pill to swallow when you have very little to be able to navigate a new country. And so I hold that story with me as I permeate my artistry. In regards to ethnic roots, I am finding myself wanting to tap in a little bit more on Filipino indigenous, Filipino indigeneity, and I've been looking at like weaving pineapple fibers, Christmas traditions, because I think I've been so divorced from my Filipino culture, my Filipino identity, and my Filipino home. My home in the Philippines has provided me so much trauma that I wanted to be as far as being Filipino as possible. So now that I'm, older, I think I've healed a lot of that because I found safety here in America. That I've healed a lot of that dialogue in my head of wanting to divorce myself from my culture, of my homeland. And I find myself, again, like wanting to learn how to make things that are associated to traditional Filipino culture. So for instance, in Christmas, there's these lanterns that are called parols, and they're basically like lanterns that are hung up all throughout the Philippines, and people can make them with very simple, plastic paper or
or any type of paper, and with sticks, and you can glue them, you could tie them, you can weave them, you can use recycled materials, you could use new materials. But more recently, my sister-in-law, who is Mexican, who is trying to teach my niece and nephew the Filipino traditions, actually held this space for me to learn with my niece and nephew what Filipino Christmas is about in terms of paroles. And it was so sweet because I think with her teaching me about my culture, it didn't feel like a sense of obligation or pressure or shame that I didn't know about my culture. If anything, I was able to embrace my culture even more through someone else holding space for me to do that. So that's just one example of my yearningness to learn a little bit more, experience a little bit more about my roots later in life. I think it's important to be rooted in culture in relation to generational responsibility. I think about my ancestors before me, and I think about the generations after me. And there is a sense of responsibility to pass down these cultures, these traditions. And personally, I feel like my parents didn't do a good job doing that. They wanted me to be Americanized, or maybe it's because I have a mixed identity. And they have mixed identities themselves. So it was hard to grapple what cultures and what traditions we should stick to. And I don't ever want my children, if I did bear children, I don't want my children or my nieces and nephews to come to me in search for their cultural background and identity, and I cannot provide the answers for it or the education behind it. So I do think I have that responsibility to continue it in my lineage, for preservation reasons and like honoring family and culture. As an immigrant, particularly as someone who's formerly undocumented or someone who is documented, resources and access don't go hand in hand. We're a community that has been historically discentered, disenfranchised, marginalized, whatever word you want to put it, we've experienced the lack of resources and elevation, and also the notion and the idea that we are poor labor ourselves, or we don't require access to quality of life or abundance, or just in general, like being an artist. We're often quantified in terms of our capital is labor. So when I think about how that informs my art practice and how my immigration identity informs my art practice, is that I want to reframe the poor artist narrative, the immigrant narrative of being a laborer, the immigrant narrative of not being creative. And I want to be able to hold systems and people and institutions accountable to their equity and inclusion initiatives when it comes to immigrant artists, because it's so important that we see ourselves in these spaces and we see the beauty of ourselves in these spaces. So my photographs, videos, art pieces often just champion the beauty of our identities and nothing else. I try not to overtly politicize. I try not to have too much of a weighted message, because I think, as simple as it is, our identities being captured in a dignified way and being able to occupy spaces in a monumentous way is shifting the culture and conversation in the art world, where we can look at ourselves with dignity and we can appreciate ourselves with dignity rather than the traumatization of our identities. In a perfect world, refugees would be embraced. I don't think that's the case. I don't think refugees are embraced. I think there is an outright, overt disempowerment and lack of inclusion for refugees. I think refugees are often in the victimization language. So quite often we are othered. That poor refugee, they don't have a place to live. And other people will say, your refugees are welcome here. And other people will say, we are not accepting refugees. We're just going to leave you hang to dry. So, I've never experienced being embraced. I've only experienced being othered. Perhaps I'm creating a culture of embrace. So for instance, when Afghan refugees were having a plight to other countries because of what was happening in Afghanistan, I fully stepped up and used my resources to make sure that my friends and people that I knew that were helping Afghan refugees knew that I embraced them and I can help provide resources. And similar to Palestinian refugees, refugees aren't welcomed and their plight isn't embraced. And I think it's up to us as people to create that culture, but it's hard to see that culture with all the negativity happening in mass media. I think that's why it goes back to one-on-one relationships. I think people can feel embraced with one-on-one relationships and conversation, but not as a society as a whole. Belonging is a hard topic for me because I don't feel a sense of belonging. I think I would be lying to say if I did. I don't have a definition of belonging. I don't have an aspirational definition of belonging. I haven't felt belonged or feel like I've received belonging. Maybe I have created belonging for someone else and I didn't know about it. Belonging is part of life's work, and it's all about perspective. And at this point in time, I don't think I have the right perspective to be able to identify what belonging means to me. I've assimilated to become a good immigrant. Not to say that I've been someone who wants to be a bad immigrant, but there is that good immigrant, bad immigrant narrative. You're a bad immigrant if you're not educated. You're a bad immigrant if you have tattoos. You're a bad immigrant if you're a laborer. And you're a bad immigrant if you're black or brown or queer. You're a good immigrant if you work hard and take care of your family and self-sacrifice yourself. You're a good immigrant if you go to school, get good grades. You're a good immigrant if you make sure that you get a well-established career. You're a good immigrant if you are able to speak good English. You're a good immigrant if you are able to present yourself in spaces where your proximity to whiteness, because of the way you speak and the way you present yourself, is familiar. You're a good immigrant if you're able to portray yourself with status or wealth and not, dress a certain way. So I have assimilated in various ways to be able to permeate spaces where people don't think I'm an immigrant at all, to be that highly educated person. And when that happens to a specific place, we're talking about place, and you're asking about place and proximity to place, that creates that outer shell of being a good immigrant that I so specifically built up. I feel like I can never let it down. I can never truly be myself. I always have to be overachieving. I always have to play by the book, follow the rules. Again, it creates the sense of unease. You can never just be yourself. Your accent, the way you talk, the way you speak, the moment you reveal yourself, maybe that you become a bad immigrant. And oftentimes I feel like that's why people build communities around and pockets of communities so they won't be othered. So for instance, there's Chinatown, there's Filipino Town, there's Little Ethiopia. There's these pockets of places where people are saying, it's okay if you don't assimilate here. You are fine. Your accent is fine. You are accepted. You don't have to code switch. You can just be. And you can identify with your culture just fine. Because here, you can be you. And that is good enough. I firmly believe in whatever I do, whatever actions I take, whatever steps I make in my career and in my life, I'm bringing 10, 20, 100 people, thousands of people with me. And I think about people who don't have access like I do. I have a lot of privileges. I'm able to navigate in ways that people aren't able to. And whenever I am able to receive opportunities, I do like to pass it down, open it up, suggest other people in my circle to take those opportunities, because I am okay to be that container, that vehicle, to be able to create access for people. I also think that people like to use competition as a fuel to limit access, and I actually don't believe in competition. I believe in abundance and collaboration. And all of these fancy words of equity, access, diversity, for me, all of that doesn't matter unless we are able to self-advocate and community advocate, or advocate for each other. I want to be that person that people think of when there was this quote, surround yourself with people that in a room of opportunity, they will say your name loud and proud to make sure that you have access to that opportunity. And I do want to be that person that cheers on people in a room full of opportunity. And I'm name dropping a list of 100 artists that I know would be able to move their work forward in ways